Hello, my name is Beth Dixon, and this is lesson 2 for homework questions 5, 6, 7, and 8. And this is on Pythagorean Theorem and right triangles. When you do your Pythagorean Theorem and right triangles, you want to first draw a triangle, and I would really recommend that you draw that on your own paper. When you draw it, remember that it makes a right triangle because it has a right angle, that corner. And you want to find your corner or your right angle first, your right angle. And then across from that right angle is the longest side. That longest side is your hypotenuse. And so I am really big on using words and labeling. Hypotenuse. I think I spelled that right. If I didn't, just ignore it and change the spelling. So there is your hypotenuse. So label it. Learn your vocabulary as you do this. So that's your hypotenuse. Your hypotenuse is always your C, just because the Queen of Math says so. So that's your hypotenuse. Your other two sides are labeled A and B, and A and B are your legs. Now your legs are interchangeable, so you can label them either direction. For our case, I'm going to label this one A and this one B. So we have A, B, and C of our legs and our hypotenuse. Then you will either have a drawing or words that tell you what we have, and that will be given. So what I have in this first case is I have given to us that A is 24 and B is 7, and it's asking us to find the hypotenuse. So the next thing that you need to do is to write down your Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And that's your Pythagorean theorem. So what are we going to do? We're going to plug and chug. Well, a little bit more than that, but we're going to plug in our values. So we're going to plug in A is 24. So where we see an A, we're going to replace it with 24. So that becomes 24 squared. We're going to look for B. B is 7. So that becomes 7 squared. And then that leaves us C squared. Using your calculator, no, we don't expect you to know these. We get 24 squared is 576. And you can do that simply by going 24 and then pressing, making sure I've not lost my finger, the squared button here, and then pressing enter. You can do that the same with 7. 7 squared then would give you 49. And then add those two together. And that would give you 625. That gives you what C squared is. That gives you what C times C equals. Pythagorean theorem works, and it's got some proofs that we won't cover in this class, but it works when we talk about their squared values. But we don't really care what their squared values is. We want to know what the original value is. So that's why we did all those square root problems, so that we could take the square root of this to find out what the original value is. So that's the square root of this and the square root of that. That gives me the C, or the value of that hypotenuse, not the hypotenuse squared. And then the square root of 625, which would be 25. And that is how we solve when we're missing the hypotenuse. Notice that we add these two and they're right next to each other. And I say that because that will lead us into the next type of Pythagorean theorem problems that we do. So let me erase everything but the triangle. And let's look at one where, again, we're going to say this is C, which is the hypotenuse. And this is A, and this is B. And in this case, in the words of the problem, it told us that the hypotenuse was 23 and the one leg was 12. So I know that one leg is 12 and the hypotenuse was 23. And if it gives you a unit, then it may say like 23 feet, 12 feet. Then we would want to write feet with our answer here. And in this case, we don't know what the other leg is. Notice that if it gives you words, you should draw a triangle to go with it. And in our case, we're going to go back and write the Pythagorean theorem once again. As we substitute, we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. A squared is 12. So that's going to be 12 squared. Notice this time I put it in parentheses. It's not necessary. It just happened I started a parentheses. That's what I did. B, I don't know. So B is the unknown. So I leave it B squared. C is 23. So that's where the 23 goes. 12 times 12 gives me 144 plus B squared. 23 squared gives me 529. Notice this time that the 144 and the 529, yeah, that's almost out of frame, but it's not. There's nothing else over there. That's just a 9. The 529 and the 144 are not next to each other. They are divided and separated by this equals. And depending on whether you've done your equation lesson yet or not, depends on whether this next step is familiar or whether it's completely new. So if it's completely new, just trust me and do what I say because the Queen of Math says so. And this means that we need to subtract. In other words, if they're together, like in the first example, we will add. If they're separated by the equals, we will subtract. Because that says we've got what's this plus this equals the 529. So this alone has to be the difference between those. So we find the difference. So 529 minus 144 gives us 385. So that says B squared equals 385. And again, this is the squared. So we take the square root of both sides. And in the Pythagorean theorem, that last step will always be to take the square root. So now we're going to take the square root of 385. And that gives us that B equals 19.62141. And let's round it to 2 decimal places, which would be the 2. The 1 is less than 5, so that means we do not round up. So that means that's going to stay the same. So that would be 19.62. And yeah, that's kind of falling off the end of my thing, but that's 19.62. And that concludes this example. So that's the 2 types that we can do. We can have either a missing hypotenuse or a missing leg. In the hypotenuse, we'll add the 2 legs, the squares of the 2 legs, and then take the square root. In a missing in a missing leg, we will end up with a subtraction as part of the problem, and you should follow this example. Thank you for watching, and this is for examples 5, 6, 7, and 8.